Good evening. I'm Nancy Barr, Curator of Photography at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and I'm pleased to introduce our program tonight on the work and legacy of activist, artist, and photographer Kwame Brathwaite. The program is in conjunction with the exhibition Black is Beautiful, the photography of Kwame Brathwaite, currently on view at the Detroit Institute of Arts through Sunday, January 6, 2022. The exhibition features his work from the 1950s and 1960s, much of it made in Harlem, New York, and it includes jazz photography, portraiture, fashion photography, and photojournalism. The title takes its name from Black is Beautiful, a cultural movement taking roots in the U.S. in the 1960s and 1970s. Many of the photographs in the exhibition show the Grandassa Models, an all-black modeling troupe who embraced the Black is Beautiful moment by celebrating and promoting natural hair and African-inspired clothing. You'll see some of the photographs of the Grandassas in the presentation tonight, along with other works in the exhibition. I'd like to take a moment to thank those supporting the exhibition, including the National Endowment for the Arts and the Photographic Arts Council Los Angeles. At the Detroit Institute of Arts, major support is generously provided by Cadillac, with additional support provided by individuals Lisa Pernick and Bruce Israel, Maureen and Roy S. Roberts, and Rhonda D. Welburn. Again, the exhibition will be up at the DIA through Sunday, January 16th, 2022. And for those of you in the Michigan area, museum admission is free for residents of Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties. Reservations are recommended, and you can book them on our website at dia.org. I'd like to give a little bio on our guests tonight, and our guest speakers include Kwame Samori Brathwaite, is the son of photographer Kwame Brathwaite, and is the director of the Kwame Brathwaite Archive and the curator of the exhibition Black is Beautiful. He's also a real estate professional who received an undergraduate degree in law, jurisprudence, and social thought from Amherst College in 1996, and an MBA from the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business in 2018. In addition to managing the archive, he's involved with collaborative projects that reflect the themes in his father's work, namely activism, politics, fashion, and music. He authored a chapter entitled Fashion and Consciousness in the book Mod New York, Fashion Takes a Trip, and has lectured at numerous institutions, including the Harvard Art Museum, the Courtauld Institute, and the Museum of the City of New York. He's also co-curated Celebrity in the Everyday at Philip Martin Gallery in 2018, curated The Struggle Continues, Victory is Certain in 2020, and Changing Times 2021. He lives in San Marino, California with his wife and 3 children. Also with us tonight is Dr. Kenneth Montague, a Toronto-based dentist, art collector, and the founder and director of Wedge Curatorial Projects, a nonprofit organization that supports both emerging and established African and diasporic artists. Since 1997, he's been exhibiting contemporary art that explores Black identity, showcasing these works within his growing Wedge collection. Kenneth has served on the African Acquisitions Committee at the Tate Modern London, as well as the Photography Curatorial Committee of the Art Gallery of Ontario, where he's also trustee and advisor to their new department, Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora. Kenneth has also served as a juror for major photography awards, including Canada's 2010 Grange Prize, recognizing the best in Canadian and international photography, Africa's 2015 Bamako Encounters, Biennial of Contemporary African Photography, and Canada's Scotiabank Photography Award in 2021. For his ongoing work with emerging artists and young creatives, Kenneth has received an honorary doctorate from the Ontario College of Art and Design, University, Toronto in 2016. Most recently, the Wedge collection is the focus of a new Aperture publication entitled As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, which was named one of Time Magazine's 20 Best Photo Books of 2021. And I'd also like to introduce our moderator this evening, who is Yvette Rock, artist and founder and CEO of Detroit's Live Coal Gallery. Yvette was born in Suriname, South America in 1979 and moved with her family to Miami Beach, Florida in 1983. At 17, she moved to New York City and attended Cooper Union, receiving an undergraduate degree in fine art in 1997. Thereafter, she moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and studied painting at the University of Michigan, completing her graduate studies in 1999. After graduation, she became an artist in residence at Inside Out Literary Arts Project in Detroit in 1999, where she taught art to children grades K through 12. In 2001, she founded Live Coal Gallery, a small business transforming lives in Detroit neighborhoods through the Live Coal Collective, the Live Coal Arts, the children's art museum called The Red, and Detroit's Repatched, an arts-infused green space and art hub in Detroit's Brightmoor neighborhood. She continues to maintain an art practice in mixed media works and photography, and recently completed a fellowship with the Documenting Detroit Facing Change program. Thanks to all for joining us tonight. I'm super excited about the program and anxious to get started. So Yvette, I'll turn the program over to you and our guest speakers, Kwame and Kenneth.
Hi, thank you, Nancy, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for a conversation with Kwame Brathwaite and Dr. Kenneth Montague. I'm going to start our time by giving a little bit more background to the photographer, Kwame Brathwaite. Kwame Brathwaite was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1938 to immigrant parents from Barbados. Through documentary photography, he chronicled the social, cultural, and political developments of Harlem, Africa, and the African diaspora. In the exhibition at the DIA, there are over 40 large-scale color and black and white photographs by Kwame Brathwaite, whose work helped advance one of the most influential cultural movements of the 1960s, Black is Beautiful, when Black women and men turned to natural hairstyles and African-inspired clothing. Black is Beautiful, the photography of Kwame Brathwaite, is the first major exhibition dedicated to Brathwaite, a vital figure of the Second Harlem Renaissance. Inspired by activist and Black nationalist Marcus Garvey's writing, Brathwaite, along with his older brother, Ilambe Brath, founded the African Jazz Art Society and Studios and the Grandassa Models. Today, we have the honor of talking about the work of Kwame Brathwaite and his connection to Detroit, music, the diaspora, stewardship, and more. We also have the honor of hearing from Dr. Kenneth Montague about his relationship with the work of Kwame Brathwaite, what it means to be a collector, and his current work with Wedge Curatorial Projects. Welcome, Kwame and Kenneth. Good to be with you guys.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Kwame, as we can see on the screen, there's a pretty special photograph. Your dad traveled a lot, including to our very own Detroit. Can you share a little bit more in greater detail about his travels to the city and what that meant to him as a young photojournalist? And can you share with our guests at what point in your dad's career and travels did you personally connect with him and the work that he's doing? How did it shape who you are today?
Well, first I'd like to say thank you to the DIA, to Aperture, to Nancy, and to you, Yvette, and Dr. Montague, of course. Yeah, I think it's really incredible when you think about the establishment of AJAZZ as a group, and then later on the Grandassa Models as early as 1962. And in fact, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the formation of the Grandassa Models in that first show, the first Naturalist show at the Purple Manor in Harlem on January 20th, 2022. So it's 60 years to celebrate that. But shortly thereafter, one of the things that happened was as word started to spread about the work that they were doing, AJAZZ, my father obviously as the photographer behind it, but this group of creatives that had come together that really established a new way to think about ourselves as people. One of the things that they wanted to do was to kind of spread the word, and they were successful in doing that. And Detroit was one of the places. It was Chicago and Detroit. In '63, they traveled to Detroit and had their first show. But I remember my father really speaking about the fact that when he traveled to Detroit, there was just this amazing kind of warmth, that Midwest sensibility of being welcoming, and that community itself being such a strong community of, an urban center, in the Midwest. Having the support from the people who were there, who were really hungry for this notion of embracing one's ancestry, embracing who we are as a people. And so it was a really incredible moment for them to be able to kind of travel there. And that's through, the network that had developed as they were doing the show starting in 1956. It was this network of people other creatives, people like Max Roach and Abby Lincoln and Miles Davis, who had all become early supporters of AJAZZ, who helped spread the word and enable them to travel to venues like they did in Detroit, Chicago, Lincoln University, and others. And so that was really a really special place for them. And he talked about even when he caught the taxi, it was, cold, and he was, in the snow, and the taxi driver gave him his card and said, "Hey, wherever you need to go, I will take you." So he almost became his personal kind of chauffeur at the time, just to make sure he got to all the right places, and he took him to the spaces where he knew they would be accepting. So it was a really special kind of moment to come full circle and have the DIA show the exhibition and display the work. So it's really important. But I think when you think about, asking about the kind of the childhood, the theme Black is Beautiful, which is really at the core of his work, it was always there. It was, it was in the way which we kind of, interacted with each other, and we interacted with the community and the neighborhood, the thoughts of buy Black and self-sufficiency. But I think the point where I became aware of kind of what he was doing, I would when I was a child, I would go to some of the meetings that they would have and have to sit there and not really understanding what was happening. But I think when I really became aware of the impact of what they were doing was right around when I was about 16 years old. And that's when I started working with him as his assistant. And I got an opportunity to see him in his element, really, in the dark room, spending time in the dark room with him, which was actually some of the more special moments. As a child, you think, it's going to some of the events, but the dark room was a really special time because my father, as those who know him, wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it was, there was something behind it. And so we'd spend hours in the dark room, and all of a sudden he'd be like, "Hey, Kwame, come over here," and show me his technique and show me how he was doing the work. And so that's when I realized the importance and the passion behind the work that was there. And then again, later on, as I started really delving into this project as an adult, is really when it really kind of took off. But the themes, the family, my Uncle Lambe and his family being right up the street and spending time with them, and my Uncle John, who's up in Mount Vernon, it was always a part of how we grew up and part of the community that we were in. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's really inspiring and beautiful. I could picture you as a child being in the dark room. Having been in dark rooms myself, I love that space. So it's what a privilege that you were able to see your dad come up with these beautiful works of art. Kenneth, I'm going to ask you a similar question. I think it's pretty amazing, your connection to Kwame Brathwaite, and maybe you could share a little bit about your own history and how you came to even, begin to show interest in this. I did find one little quote that I read about you that I thought was pretty beautiful. And you shared a commencement speech at Ontario College of Art and Design. You say, "My parents' greatest legacy was to instill in us a sense of curiosity and wonder. Even as a 10-year-old, I loved the experience of public libraries and art galleries, and saw my own family story reflected in the photography of James Van Der Zee and Gordon Parks, and in the mural art of Diego Rivera, which of course is in the DIA." So can you share a little bit more about that, this curiosity and wonder, and your experience here in Detroit?
Okay. Hey, Yvette, Kwame, great to see you all. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and thank you to Aperture for putting this together with the DIA. I feel very honored to be here. This is a very special talk for me because Detroit is in my heart. I was born in Windsor, Ontario, across the river from Detroit. So we're a Canadian family, but Jamaican origins. So my parents both were immigrants from Jamaica and kind of met as foreign students. My mom was at New York University in the 1950s, and my dad was at University of Toronto. They were like the only Black students they knew on campus at the time, in those days. And my dad came out of teachers college, and Toronto's school board was not hiring Black teachers, and ended up getting a job in Little Windsor, the southernmost Canadian city directly across from Detroit on the Detroit River. So I kind of had a very almost tricultural upbringing. It was like Caribbean culture and food and music at home, and surrounded, of course, by Canadian culture, really we were like the only Black family in our neighborhood. So I went to school being that, that island, the only kid in the class. But there was Detroit across the river, and that was a very dynamic time. Of course, I was born in the 60s. So, for me, Detroit was everything. When you're about 15 years old, you start going to Detroit, with your friends every weekend, It's like, but even as a kid, somewhere between 5 and 10 and 12 years old, I was hanging out every weekend. My dad was doing graduate work at Wayne State University in Detroit as an educator. And my mom would take the three of us, and that's me being carried by my mom home from the hospital there in the picture. But, we'd leave our little suburban Windsor home, and Dad would be studying in the library at Wayne State, and we would be going to the Detroit Institute of Arts, to the Detroit Historical Society, to the public library. So these are institutions that meant everything for me. And I can remember distinctly as a 10-year-old seeing the image by James Van Der Zee of the couple in raccoon coats, which is now part of my collection. And, that's the first serious photograph that I purchased, more than 20 years ago. And I started collecting seriously about 25 years ago. So, it's really the image that kind of put everything in place for me, because I remember distinctly as a kid the kind of TV shows that we were getting, like, Good Times and What's Happening, and they were funny, but our family was more laughing at those shows than with those shows. We were like, that's not my experience, growing up as a Black Canadian anyway, and I just hadn't seen Black Americans depicted like what I saw in that photograph. So it was burned in my brain, this kind of impossible sophistication, and the fur coats and the white wall tires with that Cadillac, the Harlem brownstone, the pride in their gesture and their pose. It was almost defiance, like a resistance. Like, it's like, this is who we are, take it or leave it. Like, I loved this photograph, and I got it as a kid. And I talked to colleagues like Deborah Willis and others now who also of my generation feel like that photograph was everything for them. It's a really important image that started me on a path of wanting to spend a longer time with images than just seeing them on the wall of a gallery or in a magazine. There was no internet then. So it really is what started it all. And it was all at the DIA. So, I have to thank Detroit for what it gave me in my life.
Thank you. I think you mentioned also another institution I heard you speak of before, which was Motown, right? Can you share a little bit about that experience in the House of Beauty?
Yeah. Well, another thing we do on those weekends, on those long Saturdays, was, I'd find myself sitting with my sister on the stoop in front of the House of Beauty, which was this amazing beauty salon. And I think every American city would have those places, like a long row of sinks, and women sitting there getting their hair done, soul music playing. And really, just across the way is Motown Records. I can also remember, visiting there as a kid. And I remember once driving up with my father, just the two of us in the car. And I think I was just starting guitar lessons then. And we went by, and there was like, Diana Ross coming out of like a limousine, white gloves on. And it's just, these are like indelible images when you're a kid. The beauty, it really started me thinking about the idea and the concept of Black is beautiful. It was so, inherent, so visceral for me growing up with a place like Detroit in my life. It was the music, the food, the culture. I remember seeing the movie Shaft, the first run at the cinema in the 70s. My older brother took me. I was underage, but I enjoyed that. It was just like, these are things that meant so much to me. And so when I see the images from Kwame Brathwaite around Black is Beautiful, and I feel like, this is the origin of this whole movement and concept, it really moves me. And so I'm thrilled to say that Kwame's work is also in my Wedge collection now as well. These are personal images for me.
Thank you. Beautiful. I would love it if any of you in the audience, if you wanted to make comments, please do so. And even if you want to share in the comments, maybe what year you first heard the term Black is beautiful, as a way to just see when people heard that phrase. In the book, there's a book that the DIA, the Aperture here has, the DIA has available. Tanisha Ford, who is the writer, says this about Brathwaite. It says, from his days photographing the jazz shows, Brathwaite learned a skill that would serve him well over the course of his career: patience. Many of his early images are from Club 845 sets, jazzmen on their horns, spectators enthralled by the music. His main aim with these initial photos was to translate the essence of the experience for the viewer, make them feel and hear it. Accomplishing this wasn't easy. Brathwaite wouldn't just fire off multiple shots in hopes that one would catch the moment at its peak. He would instead wait, letting a performance or a conversation unfold, making himself virtually invisible in the setting so that the musician or people chatting could sink into the truest versions of themselves, lost in their actions, no longer focusing on his lens. I thought that was very well worded. And as the co-founder of the African Jazz Art Society and Studios, Kwame, can you share this about your dad? Just, you know, his relationship with the musicians that he photographed and why he was so invested in documenting musicians in this particular way.
Yeah, well, I think it's really great that we're on this slide. This is, an A-Jazz shot, a picture of some of the A-Jazz, some of the original A-Jazz members, Bob Gums, Frank Adu, Alambe seated, his older brother and co-founder, my father. And then we have Ernest Baxter and Chris Hall. And it's really this, the relationship with music was started as early as when they graduated from high school. So this was a group of creatives, right? Everyone knew each other from School of Industrial Arts, and they had come together and were really into jazz music. So when they were 18 and 19 years old, and I really want to emphasize the fact that they were this young. At 18 and 19 years old, I don't know what you guys were doing, but at 18 and 19, I was, this is going to college. This is freshman year of college. This is different mindset, right? They came together and had a vision for what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to be these people who were forward thinking, who embraced the music of the time, and also wanted to kind of stretch the limits of our imagination about ourselves. And so, this is 56 when they're forming A-Jazz, and they're calling themselves African Jazz Art Society, right? At this time, the studios had not been there. They hadn't established studios. But when you're saying in a time when people are calling themselves Negro, you're calling yourselves African, they had already established that they wanted to have this this connection, right, to the diaspora, to our ancestral roots. And so what that in and of itself, so that 18 and 19 years old, is something to really respect and commend them on. And I think what they started to do is they started to put these shows together at Clubs 845, where they were pulling together musicians in the jazz world, not maybe the headliners, but the people who they knew were, the up and coming and the ones who could put together an amazing show. And they were curating these shows as this group of creatives. But along with it, there was the aspect of, challenging people's political views, having people think about, what's happening in the world and what's happening socially. And they called it edutainment. And so that was where the music was established. It was early on. And you see some of the album covers that my father shot in their hands, but also here, where you have, Clara Buggs on the cover, my aunt Numsa, Alambe's wife and educator activist. And you have, why am I drawing a blank? Drawing a blank on the last person, but you have this group of women coming together and being, representing this aspect of beauty. What's important about this is that, these are most jazz covers, most jazz album covers were either scantily clad women or they were, the jazz musicians themselves. So to have these women representing this standard of beauty, an African standard of beauty on the cover of these albums were pretty incredible. Yes, thank you, Brenda Deaver. And so on the Oh Baby cover. And I think one of the things when you take a look at this relationship with music, this was how they really formulated the interest. That's how they got people there. And when they got them there, they were able to kind of educate and entertain them, but also kind of expand their cultural and social thought. This connection with, people like Miles Davis, who's an early supporter, Max Roach and Abby Lincoln, those are the people that really helped to establish what they were doing. And this connection with music was also not just outside and externally with what they were doing and what my father was doing, but it was in the home. And I think back to what Dr. Montague was saying about, the cultural aspect of it. The music was playing in our home, right? And so there was jazz, there was a lot of reggae. My father was a big Bob Marley fan. And when you think back, it's really interesting because he credits Bob Marley with really opening doors for him because when people saw that Bob Marley trusted him, they really opened up and allowed him to kind of be in that space as well. But, when we're talking about childhood, my father used to wake me up every morning to Get Up, Stand Up by Bob Marley. It was not so much fun as a kid, but when you think about the messages that are in the music, the themes that are concordant with, the themes in Black is Beautiful and Pan-Africanism, that was really an important part of what he was establishing. And it also was part of, how he was out and getting assigned to shows. And, the AJazz Studios were a couple of doors down from the Apollo Theater. So for him, it created an opportunity for him to be known for the work that he was doing, both in the jazz clubs and their shows that they're doing, but also capturing these images of people, as they were performing and getting assignments and doing things like that. So music was a critical part of the establishment of AJazz initially, but it also became kind of thematic in his work and how he went on in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Music was a very integral part of what he did.
This makes me wonder about, thank you for sharing that, looking at the album covers and some of these photographs, I wonder if at least I'm wondering, did he distinguish between I'm doing this because I need to earn money, so I'm going to do some commercial, that distinction that some photographers might make today. It's like, I'm doing this so this can happen, and this is like my fine art, which is, he probably wouldn't say that way, but can you share a little bit about, was there a distinction for him when he was photographing different musicians?
No, I think, he had really developed very much a documentary lens, right? And so he was one that, and frankly, that point in time wasn't like, major institutions consider photography fine art. And for a Black photographer at that point in time, it would have been very difficult for him to break through in these types of environments that we're seeing now, where there's kind of a clamoring for Black art. But I think the ultimate thing was always this drive for empowering our people, but also this drive for representing us in a way that was regal, representing us in a way that was counteractive to what was in the newspaper, or showing us in a way that that wasn't positive. And so I don't think there wasn't a distinction between why he photographed. He was there documenting it all. And I think oftentimes what he would realize is that some images were going to be popular than others, and typically those are ones that were of popular musicians, which that's where people a lot of times knew him before we started this process of really kind of breaking into the fine art arena. But when you have people like Miles, and you have people like Nina Simone and Bob Marley and Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross. Like those are that oftentimes becomes what people are looking for, right? And so it was a way to make a living, but he became, affectionately known as the keeper of the images, and it was because he was there almost incredibly at almost at every event, right? And he was there to photograph and be there and document what were going on. So this is all part of it. And so it was really incredible to see. Now we're discovering things that are really, something that he probably loved but never printed, right? And so a lot of these images had never been seen before. And as we're going through and putting the show together, it was really, they've come to light. So it's really amazing to have that opportunity to do that.
Thank you. That really speaks highly of him as a human being and his purpose and his focus. You actually mentioned the phrase keeper of images, and I wanted to read this quote by your dad. It says, "I've been called the keeper of the images. My task has been to document creative powers throughout the diaspora, not only in our Black artists, musicians, athletes, dancers, models, and designers, but in all of us. It was my job to capture each moment of this creativity in its truest form." That's really beautiful. Can you share maybe a little bit more, like what Kwame, like why was it so important and so crucial for him to document Black artists, and what did the diaspora mean to him? That the word diaspora is being widely used now, and maybe share with the audience what that means and what it meant to your dad.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about why he really developed a passion for capturing what was happening, right? And being this person who wanted to show really what was happening behind the scenes, right? So it could be anything from the previous image where you see the people waiting for James Brown to, Max Roach and Abby Lincoln, mid-performance. And I think when we think about the diaspora, one of the things that was really integral as part of, AJAZ and the Grandassa models later on in '62 when they're formed, is that they wanted to create this connection back to the continent, right? And back to displaced Africans all around the world. And so it was to show us in our regality, to show us in our beauty, to show us in our truest form, because, you're talking about early 50s and 60s. You don't, as Dr. Montague said, images on TV were not the images that we wanted to see necessarily. They were, satirical at best. And then even the magazines that were out at the time wasn't showing the full spectrum of who we are, right? It was focused very, very mostly on what was acceptable, from an European aesthetic. And so what they wanted to do is really demonstrate that in our truest form, in our natural form, we are amazing. You have people like, again, Max Roach, Abby Lincoln, who were helping to put the word out and spread the word. And so that was critical. And having these people, the influences of that time, be able to speak for what was happening and what was going on in the world, they were bringing that information back. Later on, my uncle was, executive producer of a show on Like It Is. Like It Is was Gil Noble. And that was a show that really helped people understand what was happening in the world. It wasn't the, kind of whitewashed version of stories, or, if you take what we talk about critical race theory is now, it's telling the true story of what was happening in the world, both on the continent and abroad, and connecting it all back. And I love these images because it wasn't just, talk, they were living it. You got Jimmy Abu on the beach, in his African jacket, he's representing constantly. This is Henri speech, and you have this this notion that they were living it, and that was that was a really important part of what he wanted to portray. So that's, the diaspora is, all of us, in our spaces and living for that connection, being that bridge back. I love this Merton Simpson Gallery is one of the first Black galleries in New York City, and having this history there, even shooting there and shooting amongst the African ephemera was an important part of telling a story about who they wanted to be and who they wanted to portray and what they wanted to put out into the world.
Thank you. Kenneth, hi. Let's connect a little bit about your project, the Wedge Curatorial Projects, and can you share what your work is about in relationship with the diaspora, and what can you reflect on in your collection, and why you've collected these works, and how it reflects on contemporary Black life?
Yeah, sure. So, as I was saying, I started collecting art seriously back in about 1997, but I started my dental practice in Toronto in 1992. So, through school, I'd always been interested in local artists' work. For me, it was really a way to sort of learn more about my own community, which was not right on a platter growing up in Canada where I did. As I mentioned, feeling like an island, you're drawn to images of self and sort of thinking about the many ways of being Black, being and becoming, as Stuart Hall says. So this kind of idea was very, very much who I was. And I think the collecting impulse was probably always there for me. I was the kid that was collecting seashells and bottle caps and always making order out of things. But art for me really was a way forward. It was about my own identity and seeing reflections of self. So I've got quite a large collection now that's primarily photography, but also painting and sculpture, video work. And it's based in Toronto, but we lend a lot of works internationally. And I think the Aperture Foundation saw the sort of love and passion that has been put into the collection, and then offered me this chance to sort of put out a book about the collection, which was a pretty wonderful pandemic project. And just thinking about the collection, as Kwame said, it's such a great thing to put a show together or a book together, and gives you an opportunity to really kind of put things in perspective. And I saw the various tropes in the collection come together. That title, As We Rise, really relates to my late father's phrase, lifting as we rise, the idea of as you do well, you bring up others in your community. And I think that Aperture saw that sort of metaphor with what I've been doing in my collecting activities. So there's a lot of emerging artists, a lot of established artists. The work here in the book is of course by Kwame Brathwaite. There's this wonderful image of his partner, and also the self-portrait. I've got a lot of self-portraits in the collection, and I think that the feeling, there's another in the book, Ming Smith, who's a member of Kamwinye, and these self-portraits I think are important because we often think about the pose and the gesture that the photographer is kind of giving over to the subject, but really this is telling something about themselves in a really intimate way. Most photographers, as we know, don't like to get their picture taken, and so taking an image of themselves might be in a lot of ways a super intimate, super private thing for them to do. So I cherish these self portraits, and of course again they reflect this image of self, being and becoming. This is who I am. If we move to I think is there a final image there? Yeah. So I wanted to highlight some other works in the book by photographers from Detroit. Ming Smith was born in Detroit and then moved to Chicago. This is Ricky Weaver, who's an emerging photographer who's doing very well, teaches in Michigan. I saw her work at a show that was organized by Carrie Mae Weems, who's a well-known African-American photographer and also on a mission to kind of lift as she rises. And I loved Ricky's take on the self. This is actually the artist herself superimposed in different activities and positions in her home, in her room. And it kind of makes me think about all those tropes and ideas about Detroit: the hair salon, self-care, Black is beautiful. I mean, it's all there in this image. Yeah, thanks. A final one I might show from the book. These are just examples of some of the works in the book As We Rise. Is also that you can kind of imagine that the influence that Kwame Brathwaite had, that he and his brother, this phrase "Black is beautiful," this idea, this movement that was happening through the 60s in America, left its mark. There were fashion shows wherever the diaspora was. In the UK, a Jamaican immigrant to England, Raphael Albert, was doing his own fashion shows, producing them and taking these pictures. Miss Black Jamaica UK, Miss Black and Beautiful. This is 1972. And you just know that, this idea of the natural hairstyle, the idea of Black ownership and control in terms of having a modeling agency and doing beauty pageants. These are ideas that came from the Brathwaites. And so it's kind of thrilling to me to see these connections within the collection. I actually bought this work several years ago and then later bought Kwame's work. And it was interesting to see how it all kind of comes together in the storytelling around the many ways of being Black.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kevin.
you're welcome.
Thank you. And, in speaking of your collection that you've been doing, you said since 97?
Yeah, maybe 97 is when I seriously started to collect. Yeah, so 25 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. It's been a while. Good to
Yeah, I'm a senior guy. I'm the old guy.
In an interview, Kenneth, with Artland, you mentioned that you're hoping that moving forward, you won't be the only Black collector, that you always meet at, let's say, art fairs, and that the world that you're in around contemporary African art. And we need more collectors and gallery directors, more curators, scholars, academics in this work. Can you speak more on why that is so important to you, and what it means for Black collectors to actually help shape the narrative in the art world? And then can you maybe give an encouragement to those who are considering collecting work around the diaspora?
Yeah, sure. It's a great point and great question. I really have to reiterate that I am on a mission about creating more Black collectors, and not just of Black artists, but the idea that people in our community, will spend money on, an ephemeral thing like a sports car, and you could buy a painting that you're going to live with that not only is appreciating in value, but it's something that you're going to cherish and love deeper and deeper. You're not going to get sick of that thing. That's going to become part of your life. I talk to young people and young business people in the Black community in Toronto all the time about this idea of putting your not just your money, but your soul into protecting, guarding, and kind of being, the guardian of these images around our own culture and community. I think it's so critical that we control the narrative. And I also think this extends to institutions. I'm a trustee at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is sort of our museum of modern art in Toronto. And, we are working so hard to, make sure that the collection reflects the community that it serves. So, like most institutions here in North America, there's a dearth of images of people of color, a dearth of images of Indigenous people, people from the other places, which is now really a reflection of the city of Toronto. So, it's we're just behind the times if we're not reflecting that in the programming at the institution, in the collection, in the people who are on the board of trustees, in the curatorial department, in marketing. So I'm really kind of spreading that word and making sure that through representation, this won't just be a moment in the art market. Oh, we're celebrating Black artists, but that, I take the long view. We need to be part of the conversation moving forward and not take our foot off the gas about this idea of representation and the need for seeing ourselves, in images in these public institutions. That's my mission.
Thank you. Thank you for fulfilling that mission and going after it and encouraging others in that as well. Kwame, I know for you, obviously, you are the steward of this amazing archive that you've been entrusted with. Can you share with us what it means to be a steward of this collection and an archivist of your father's work, and how you are encouraging the younger generation as well in this model that you're putting out?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's really, obviously there's the legacy factor of it, right? There's, I really started to look at it, and as we were kind of looking at my father's work and the body of work, and it's funny, I've told the story before, but I think, when the light bulb, the aha moment, right, was a few years back when my mother and my father were visiting, and my father had like two, 8 by 10 prints in a manila envelope. And, one of them was this image of like the Righteous Brothers, David Bowie, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and Roberta Flack backstage at the Grammys in 1975. And the other one was this beautiful image of Ali, and it was different. He was pensive and he was sitting there. It wasn't like, he was entertaining for the crowd. And it was after one of those kind of like photo shoots where he was entertaining everybody and, being Ali. And it was about 45 minutes later, my father described, and they were just there together. And it was, right at the Congo River a couple of days before the Rumble in the Jungle. And it was this beautiful image. And I said, Baba, I've never seen these before. And he goes, I got plenty of images you've never seen before. And it was the moment when my wife and I looked at each other like, wow, we have to do something to make sure that this is taken care of. So that's at the foremost. That's at the forefront of like everything that we're doing. We want to make sure that the work is preserved, right? Because there's this amazing story, and I think there was a curator who said this probably is the most complete collection of, even if you just looked at music, from 1956 through like 2015. That storyline is just amazing. But I think for me, the important part of it is it's our story. And as Dr. Montague said, telling our story is a really important part, and it's part of our tradition, right? The griot tradition, the passing down of the oral history. This is the passing down of the visual history so that it can accompany those stories and fortify the way in which we look at things. And so that's an important part of it. I think the other part that I really embrace is, these images that most of them have not been seen before, we get to share them with the world. And I think that's part of the story that I want to tell as well, whether it be, in a book or an art exhibition, or, sharing them with others who want to do books on different subject matter. Being that resource is really incredible. And as we've gone through this process of archiving and being these people who want to really support and show others how to do it, my father's not the only person that was overlooked when, you look back and the art world's like, oh my gosh, how do we miss this? You missed a lot. You missed a lot of people who had a lot of contributions to society, whether that be through their photography or their paintings or sculpture or doll making or printmaking or, quote making, whatever it is. And there are a lot of people who are probably my age and younger who have their parents' work. They have their own job in life that they're doing, like kind of said in my bio, but like you have to take the time. And I think if you're willing to and you want to, you don't want that to get, scooped up by some organization that puts it in the closet and no one ever sees it again. That's that person's legacy. That's that person's contribution to society. It's what they left. And so helping others figure out how to go through that process, care for and be a good steward is really important for us to show others how to do that. And it's been really amazing because even during the process, we've spoken to people and people have reached out and said, oh my gosh, can you help us with this? And initially I was like, I'm still learning. And we are still, we're still going through the archive and figuring out the best way to do it. But being able to share that with others is really important. And, we just established the Kwame Brathwaite Archive, which is a 501c3, which is about preservation. It's about teaching others how to, maintain an archive. And then it's also giving it to the next generation so that they can continue along that same line's work around capturing Black joy and Black beauty and representing us in a way that's kind of concordant with what he would have done. And so, he's still fighting with us and strong, but I think it was my time to kind of really step in and help others see, what I always saw. And obviously I'm biased, but I think it's been very well received. And I think when you really think about what Dr. Montague was talking about is this stewardship and taking care of things. You have, I love the fact that in doing so, one of the things that we've almost done is not necessarily recreated AJAZ, but the people who have helped, promote the conversation, people like Dr. Montague, people like Aperture, Jesse Williams, Rihanna, Jay-Z and Beyonce, like those people are also Swiss Beats and Alicia Keys, other collectors who are taking care, they're the largest owner of Gordon Parks' work. So those people who are promoting that conversation and telling their friends and others, this is what we need to do. We need to protect this culture. We need to make sure and ensure that it lives on, but it also lives on through people who really care about what it's about.
Thank you. I almost lost it there. I was beginning to tear up. That was really beautiful. Just thinking about, wow, all the artists that were missed, and what you're doing is really remarkable, and we need to see this work. And thank you for creating this archive of his work and sharing it with the rest of us. I'm not sure if the tech team is able to put the website, or if you're able to put in the comments, both of you, how people can maybe look further into your organizations and the work you're doing, and maybe you can put the website in the comments or up on the screen. That would be wonderful. Or you can just, maybe both of you can just give the URLs to your organizations real quick. Kwame?
Oh, okay. So it's KwameBrathwaite.com. We're in the process of doing the website for the Kwame Brathwaite Archive, so that's coming soon. But yeah, and on Instagram, we're at Kwame B Photo.
Great. And then Kenneth?
Yeah, well, it's I'm the director of Wedge Curatorial Projects, which is a non-profit arts organization based in Canada here that's about emerging Black Canadian artists. So we have a great scene happening right here, and I'm all about telling our own story. So you can check Instagram at Wedge Toronto to learn more about that. And then my private collection, the Wedge Collection, would be something that you could look at online. Just Google Wedge Collection, you'll find wedgecollection.org. And of course, you'll need to pick up the new book, As We Rise, which also has Kwame Brathwaite images in there. So there you go.
Thank
All right,
you.
that's a lot.
And we
Yeah.
have the URLs there in the comments section. So we're going to transition. We have a few minutes left for our program to see if anybody has any questions. And I believe Nancy from the DIA is going to come back and join us. We're going to see if anybody has any questions. Has Kenneth seen any growth in the African Canadian artist experience?
Yes, actually, it's a great question. It's not new. I mean, I think people feel like, oh, there's a Black Canadian art scene. It's actually, a long-standing art community. There might be a little interference in the background there, but I hope you can hear me. I'm feeling like it's important to convey the idea that it's not something brand new, but there have been generations of artists here. We get kind of overshadowed sometimes by, the prominence and the number of Black American artists, but we've always had a scene here, and we have artists like June Clark who are doing, incredible work, 60s and 70s. We have, it was a proliferation of Black Canadian artists with identity art movements in the 90s. And now it's a very diverse community of artists that are doing, many different types of work and storytelling. And I think that you're going to hear more and more about a young set of artists called BOW, the Black Artists Union, which is based in Toronto, who are really kind of pushing the envelope on the idea of telling our own story. So yeah, lots is happening with Black Canadian artists. You could look up Sandra Brewster, Bidemi Olieti, and Dawit Petros, to name three.
Thank you. This is from Andrew Garrett. These books are important living archives. What is involved in converting individual collection pieces into a published book? Who wants to tackle that?
Kwame, you tell them about that.
Well, it's part of it is gathering the imagery together, right? One of the things you want to do is have a really strong set of images of whatever works you want to capture. And then for us, it ended up being a conversation that was set up by, our gallerist in LA, Philip Martin Gallery, that brought it to the attention of Aperture, Michael Famighetti. And after seeing the imagery, the conversation started about how we might be able to kind of work together on a book. And Aperture, I am actually on the board of Aperture, so I have to admit to that. But I think one of the things is being able to get it in front of the types of publishers, Aperture, Magnum, Abrams, or others, Phaidon, to show the work so that people can understand this is a body of work that's worth putting into to publish work. And then you can also self-publish. I mean, a lot of people have taken that route, but I think one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that we got this first book in the hands of a great steward in an organization like Aperture.
Thank you. We are going to conclude our program. I know there's a couple other questions, but we're going to conclude now. And thank you all so much for your comments as well that you're sharing with us. Thank you, Kwame and Kenneth, for sharing your heart and your thoughts about the photography of Kwame Brathwaite and your personal stories and about the world of collecting and stewardship and so forth. It was a beautiful conversation. Black is Beautiful, the photography of Kwame Brathwaite, will be on view at the DIA until January 16th. And as Nancy mentioned, you can go to dia.org. I'll pass it on to Nancy for any more information. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Yvette. Thanks, Kwame. Thanks, Kenneth. It's been a great evening. And I'm just reading some comments here on Facebook and YouTube, how much people have enjoyed the program and especially your personal stories. So thanks for joining us this evening. And yeah, please come out and see the show. And thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. And for Gwen and Gavin, our tech team behind the scenes here. It's really been a great program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.